the basics. So I hope my video I'm switching off because I have to go to the horizontal screen so to write simultaneously if something is needed. Okay, so regarding first of all, any robotic system, if you have to deal with, or any system in general, that will be, you can say, governed by a second order ordinary differential equation. So we need to understand the second order system so we'll cover this quickly. So we know that the second order system will be dictated by two main parameters, that is zeta and omega n, so any general system is characterized by the following transfer function, where this is called as the GS, the transfer function of the forward path, and this is HS is equal to 1. This is called as the transfer function of the closed path. So if we solve it using the block diagram reduction as given in this formula, we should come to this result, which is the standard representation of the transfer function. Transfer function means that we are interested in output to input ratio. So that is equal to omega n square upon s square plus 2 zeta omega ns plus omega n square in terms of these two parameters. So the open loop transfer function can be alternatively given like this way. This is the closed loop transfer function. The upper one is the open loop transfer function. So collectively they represent the same thing, whereas omega n represents the undamped natural frequency of the system, whereas zeta represents the damping ratio of the system. So these are the two parameters which will play a significant role in designing any kind of control system, to play with any kind of control system, and to play with the performance of the system in terms of its parameters. So let's take the example of a simple spring mass damper system because we want to develop its parameters. So we know that this is a free body diagram of the spring mass damper system, where we are having a mass M which is being displaced in the downward direction by amount X, and we know that as the body goes down, the spring will be stretched, so it will apply a upward force Kx, and their damper, which is supposed to oppose the motion of the system, it will give us the force in the upward direction by Cx dot. So we have this equation of motion using Newton's second law, that rate of change of linear momentum should be equal to summation of all the forces acting on the system, and we assume the downward direction to be positive. So mx double dot should be equal to Cx dot plus Kx minus Kx, and we can write this after collecting the terms as mx double dot plus Cx dot plus Kx as the standard representation of the second order system. So if we use it as a Laplace transform, so we can write its characteristic equation as ms square plus cs plus k, which is equal to 0, and the roots of this characteristic equation can be found because we know that the roots of the equation is minus b plus minus b square minus 4ac divided by 2a. So if we plug in all these values, so we should get the roots of this system like this way, which can be further simplified as this expression. And we know that after calculating the roots, we have the general solution of any second order differential equation as c1 e raised per first root plus c2 e raised per second root. So c1 e raised per s1t plus c2 e raised per s2t. So if we plug in the value of s1 and s2, we'll get this expression as the general solution. So this general solution we can rewrite over here. Now we can try to write this general solution or roots of this characteristic polynomial in terms of the original parameters zeta and omega n. So let's try to calculate these two expressions, c by 2m and what's k by m. So c by 2m, so that's called, so first let's try to calculate what's the critical damping constant. So the critical damping constant is the one which will make this radical to go to 0. So this is a radical. So once this radical goes to 0, that is called as the critical damping coefficient. So which means that we'll write that coefficient as Cc, special name. So Cc by 2m minus Km should be equal to 0. So from there we can calculate the value of Cc as this 2 root Km or 2m root K by m. So this is how we can calculate. And further, this damping ratio is the next term, which should be equal to the ratio of the coefficient of damping term divided by the critical damping coefficient. So it's a dimensionless quantity basically. It's a dimensionless quantity. So after defining this critical damping coefficient and damping ratio, we should be able to find the first term C by 2m. As I mentioned, this is the first term we need to calculate, which is equal to zeta omega n. And the second term is K by m, which is pretty simple because we know that K by m or omega n should be equal to root K by m, which is the natural frequency of the system. So after finding these two terms, we are now in a position to write both the roots as the in terms of these two parameters. So this is the final term, the roots in these two in terms of these two parameters, zeta omega n. So after finding the roots, now we have to find out the types of second order system. Let how the system behaves, how the performance of the system changes if the value of zeta changes. So first case, we are having 4 cases. The first case is the one where the value of zeta should be equal to less than 1. That is called as the under damped system. So in nature, every system is an under damped system, whether it's a bat, or it's a building, it's a lathe machine, anything. So everything is an under damped system in nature, and which means that if zeta is less than 1, this term zeta square minus 1 is negative. So the roots of the characteristic equation, that's why we will write this in terms of iota, because the term which, if you recall earlier, that's zeta square minus 1 is a negative term. So in order to cater this, we have to take the help of iota. So we can see that the roots are now the complex conjugate roots. So that's the property of the roots. The roots are complex conjugate. So now we can write the damped natural frequency, which is equal to omega d, which is equal to omega d equal to omega n into 1 minus zeta square. So in terms of omega d, we can finally write the roots as S12 as minus zeta omega n plus minus iota omega d. So this is the final expression of the roots in terms of the new parameters. So finally, we can write these two roots as C1 e raised per first term and C2 e raised per the second term. And we can further simplify this term. So we can take e raised per minus zeta omega nt as common. So this term it's common in both the expressions. So we'll take e raised per minus zeta omega t nt as common, and we are left with this first term plus second term. So now we can expand this e raised per iota by standard cos and sine formulation, so that we can see after expanding both the exponential terms as cos and sine, we will get to this C1 plus C2 into cos of this and iota times C1 minus C2 sine of this. So here we need to understand that if the roots are complex conjugate, the corresponding coefficients of the solution are also complex conjugate pair. So both C1 and C2 are here complex conjugate numbers, whereas the combination C1 plus C2 as well as iota times C1 minus C2 both are real numbers. Let's try to understand this. So how to do this? We know that let's assume that C1 is a complex number A plus iota B and C2 is conjugate A minus iota B. So we know that C1 plus C2 will give you 2. C1 plus C2 will give us 2 times A, and C1 minus C2 will give us 2 iota B. So we have to calculate iota times C1 minus C2, which should give us iota times 2 iota B, which is equal to 2 iota square B as minus 2B. So which is again a real number. So here you can see C1 plus C2 and C iota times C1 minus C2 both are real numbers. So we represent these two numbers as first as C1 dash and the second one iota into C1 minus C2 as C2 dash. Both are these the new constants which are real numbers. And we can write this as omega d. This also we can write it as omega d. So finally we have this expression. If we write C1 dash as R in terms of polar coordinates, C1 dash as R sine phi and C2 dash as R cos phi. So we can write this as C1 dash into cos of omega dt plus C2 dash into sine of omega dt. And finally we can write the expression in terms of polar coordinates like this way, where R and phi are the two new constants which can be calculated like this way. R is equal to x naught divided by 1 minus zeta square and phi is equal to tan inverse 1 minus zeta square divided by zeta. So now we need to understand the crux, how the roots are related to the response of the system. So we are focusing on this expression. So this root basically contains two parts. One is called as the real part of the root and the other one is called as the complex part of the root. So if we see carefully, the real part of the root comes in the power of exponential, so which will called as the exponentially decaying response. And the complex part of the root, which is omega d, that should come under this expression, which is called as the transcendental function. So that's the real part, and this is the complex part as omega d. So the real part of the root basically will help in the exponential decay, whereas the complex part of the root will give us the periodic oscillatory motion. So if we see the expression for exponential decay, we have something like the exponential decay like this way, whereas this is the second term, the sine function. If we start from some initial condition, will be like this, the sine function. And if we take the product of these two, we should be getting the exponentially decaying response, because it's the product of these two functions. So if we multiply these two, so we have this oscillatory response which is decaying in nature. So this is a typical response of an underdamped system. So where this represents the cycle time. So next comes the undamped response. So undamped response is the one where the value of zeta is equal to 0. So when zeta is equal to 0, this expression goes to 0, this zeta value goes to 0, this goes to 0, this goes to 0. So eventually you will have minus iota omega n as both the roots. Minus iota omega n, both the roots. So what's the nature of the roots? So if we see, the original roots were S12 minus zeta omega n plus minus iota omega d. So the nature of the roots is purely imaginary. So roots are purely imaginary. So plus minus iota omega d n is the roots. And what about the damped natural frequency? We know that the damped natural frequency omega d is equal to omega n into 1 minus zeta square, as zeta is 0. So we have omega d is equal to omega n. So which we can say that for the undamped system, the damped natural frequency is equal to the natural frequency of the system, or we can say alternatively that there is no damped natural frequency. It's only the natural frequency of the system. And R and phi can be calculated like this way. And so for x naught is equal to 1 for the step input. So which means that, so this R goes to 1. So when then this zeta is equal to 0, so this is equal to x naught, and x naught is equal to 1, this becomes 1, and phi is equal to tan inverse 1 minus 0 divided by 0, that is basically tan inverse infinity, that will give us pi by 2. So we can have, when zeta is equal to 0 for undamped systems, we have this e raised per, this is 1, r is 1, e raised per 0, and sine omega n t plus pi by 2. So pi by 2 is for phi, which we have just calculated. So that will give us cos of omega nt. So here you can see that once the roots have only complex part, purely imaginary, so the response has only transcendental function. So there is no exponential decay over there. So if we see, so here you can see the response of the system is like a sine or cosine term, where there is no damping, which means the amplitude of the system will remain same for rest of the life, and it is not going to rise, it's not going to decay. So once you put out the system, it will remain put out for rest of the life. So that's why if we see this part, so this part is called as the problem solver, and this part, the complex part of the root, is called as the problem creator. So from any vibration point of view, or from any robotics point of view, where the objective is to minimize the vibrations, so the real part of the root is the one which will save our life, whereas the complex part of the one which will try to impose the vibrations. So here you can see in the response, as the real part of the root is gone and the root has only complex part, similarly the exponential part in the response is also gone. So the next comes the critically damped response. So we have the same expression where the value of zeta is equal to 1 now. So as this goes to 1, so this item goes to 0, this term goes to 0. So we have both minus zeta omega n, both the roots, and zeta is equal to 1, both the roots are minus omega n. So you can see the roots are real and repeated. So as both the roots are equal, so you cannot have so the general solution is something like c1 e raised per s1t plus c2 e raised per s2t. So as both the roots are the same, in order to find the general solutions, both the roots must be independent from each other. That's why we have to impose this t term, c1 plus c2 times t into e raised per minus omega nt. So here we can see again that we are having an exponential term, but there is no transcendental function. There is no sine term, there is no cosine term. So which means that the problem creator part of the root is no more there. So we are bound to have oscillation free response. We will get the oscillation free response because there is no sine term, there is no cosine term. But if we see clearly, there is a linear term which will, as the time goes to infinity, this linear term will rise. But we also know that the exponential term is the fastest rising or growing term, decaying term. So in front of the exponential decay, the rise of the linear term has no weightage. So eventually the response will decay. So we have, in this case, this is the undamped response. So for this, we have the response will be something like this. So this is the critically damped response. So next we have the overdamped response. So where now the value of zeta is more than 1. So in under the expansion, this term will remain. We can retain this term as originally because now zeta is more than 1. So this is still a positive term. So you can see over here there is no need to have introduction of iota. Both the terms are real. So that's why the roots are real and distinct. So here both the roots are real and they are distinct, and we'll get two solutions, the solution. And for that we have, this is the critical response, and maybe if we go to the blue line, so this is when let's say the value of zeta is 2, and as you increase the value of zeta, the response will be more and more sluggish. So here you can see this is maybe for zeta equal to 1. This will be for let's say zeta equal to 2, and this will be maybe for zeta equal to 3. So as you increase the value of zeta, the response will be more and more sluggish. So then the question comes, why we need this overdamped response? Why we need this overdamped response? In typical robotic applications, where let's say the robot needs to deal with a very you can say environment full of obstacles. So the main priority of the robot is, let's say, it should not hit any human being, it should not hit itself, or it should not hit anything in the environment nearby or any other object. So in that case, we can use the characteristic of overdamped response. We can say that maybe you can take more time to complete the job, but it should not hit the obstacle at all. So this is the comparison of all the four kind of responses. So where we have zeta equal to 0, less than 1, zeta equal to 1, and zeta more than 1. So where you can see over here, there is undamped response where the magnitude will remain same. Here the magnitude will exponentially decay. So this is a critical damped response where there is no oscillations at all, and this is overdamped response when you have slightly sluggish response as compared to the critically damped response. So I will not write this table because of it will take some time to fill, but you can, from the previous slides, you can fill all this table. So this will give you a nice summary in one single slide. So like this way. So I have avoided the writing part, but still in the slide it's there. So if you see the undamped, so roots are purely imaginary. For underdamped, it's the complex conjugate. For critical damped, it's real and repeated, and overdamped, it's real and distinct. And this is the placement of the roots in this third column, how the roots are being placed over the complex plane. And this is the nature of the roots, nature of the response. So this is will give you the whole summary in one single slide. And this is the comparison of all the responses which we have seen. And now comes the locus of the roots. So we can see that as zeta equal to 0, if you recall, the root lies over here. That was iota omega n. This is the minus iota omega n. These are the roots. When basically the value of zeta is 0, undamped case. And if we see the value of zeta equal to 1, critically damped case, so that is the both the roots are lying on the real line at minus omega n, where the value of zeta is equal to 1. So here you can see from the point of view of this origin. So even this is omega n, this is omega n, this is omega n. So all the three roots are equidistant. So the locus of the roots basically follow this left circle, this circular path. So the locus starts from the root starts from here. This path goes to this position as the value of zeta is equal to 0. So as it starts, the value of zeta starts increasing from 0 to let's say 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. The upper root will take this path and the lower root will take this path. At any arbitrary position, let's say zeta equal to 0.6 or 0.7, we can take this as a value. So this is the root and this is its corresponding conjugate. So this value of the root we know is minus zeta omega n, this real part, and the complex part of the root we know is iota omega d, the vertical part. So as we'll keep on increasing the value of zeta, so the roots will follow this path. So as the value of zeta comes closer to 1 and 1, both the roots will merge over here at this point. And then if we increase the value of zeta beyond 1, so one of the roots will go from this point in this direction, which is away from the origin, and one of the root will follow this direction, which is towards the origin. This is the overdamped case when the value of zeta is more than 1. So this is the crux of locus of roots, how all the roots travel as we increase the value of zeta from 0 to 1 or beyond 1. So this is the properties of a second order system. So next we can go to the closed loop control system. So this is a typical diagram of a closed loop control system where we have this as the, let's say, output of the system. This is the input of the system, or it is also called as the desired output. For a tracking system, input and desired output is one and the same thing. And this is called as the output of the system. This is called as the feedback from the sensor. And this will be, we have, let's say, plus sign. This is with the minus sign. And this is called as the error signal. And the output from the controller, so that will be there. So the function of this controller is to basically nullify this error. Whatever is the error coming, the function of this controller is to nullify this error. And the output from the controller is called as basically actuating signal. So which will be there to derive the plant. So these are the main terms which can be written mathematically. Just hold on, please. Okay. So we'll typically write in control system the input with RS, the output with CS, the feedback channel with HS, the plant which we have already discussed, the transfer function of a second order system. The plant will be written like this: omega n square into s plus 2 zeta omega n. This is called as the error signal, ES, and this is called as the actuating signal, which is called as EAS. And K is called as the gain of the controller. So that gain, which kind of gain will be suitable? Let's try to see this in the coming discussion. So we have, first of all, let's try to discuss the control actions. So the first control action, we have the proportional control action. What's happening there? Okay. So the first control action is called as the proportional control action, where the actuating signal is proportional to the error signal. So like over here, you can see there is actuating signal, there is error signal. So there is a relationship between actuating signal and error signal, and we can say that the actuating signal is proportional to this error signal, like this way. So in order to break this inequality, we can introduce one constant which is equal to Kp, which is called as the proportional gain. And if we take the Laplace transform of this expression, so As is Kp times Es, and we know that the transfer function of this controller, which is equal to output by input. This is the output and this is the input from this controller point of view. So the transfer function of this controller is this gain Kp, which is called as the proportional gain. And in this, if we see now, we can say that the forward loop transfer function is this term and the feedback loop is unity. So this is a typical diagram in order to find out the properties of the proportional control action. So let's try to calculate the steady state error. So this steady state error basically is very important because we have to understand that what kind of application is there. So if it is a, let's say, a welding job or it's a painting job. So let's say the road is 50 feet wide and the robot is deployed to do the painting at the center of the road to draw these lines. So over there, if the robot makes an error of, let's say, 10 mm or 20 mm, so that will not make any difference from the point of view of the road because the road is already 100 feet or 200 feet wide. So 20 mm error is not a big deal. But if the same robot is doing, let's say, a medical surgery, so where it is supposed to make a cut. So over there, even what to talk of 20 mm, it's only 0.02 mm will play a huge role. So that's what the steady state error will be very crucial to understand that what kind of applications we have to, what kind of control actions we have to use. So we'll discuss this steady state error from the context of different control actions and which kind of control action we should use in order to take care of this steady state error. So to calculate the steady state error, we have this formula from the block diagram reduction that ES by RS should be equal to 1 upon 1 plus GSHS. So if we plug in these values, where RS is the input, that input can be taken as any standard input like step input, ramp input, parabolic input, or impulse input. And we have this as the final expression of ES. And finally, we know in order to calculate the steady state at time t equal to infinity. So this is the expression and that will be the final expression for steady state error. So let's try to see what's the, if we choose the input as a step input, we know that for step input, the corresponding Laplace transform is 1 by s. So this 1 by s will come over here and this one of the s will cancel with this s, but still there is a 1s in the numerator which is there. So that will make the steady state error to go to 0. So what is the crux? That for step input, proportional control action can be used because it will give us a 0 steady state error. But let's take the ramp input. So in the case of ramp input with the Laplace transform is 1 by s square. So you can see there are two s in the numerator. So both the s's will cancel with this. So we will left with this expression. And so this is the final expression for the case of ramp input. What does that mean? So which means that for any kind of ramp input, if we use proportional control action, we are bound to get a steady state error. So what we can do in order to reduce the error? So we have only one tuning parameter, that is Kp, in our hand. So we can increase the value of Kp. So let's say if we want to reduce the value of steady state error to go to 0, we have to increase the value of Kp and that on increasing. So it should keep on coming down. So ideally we should take the value of Kp as infinity so that the steady state error is 0, which is not practically possible because if we see the Kp is being related to the amount of torque being provided by a motor. So there is no motor in this real world which can give you infinite gain or infinite torque. So that's why we have to live with this. So the crux is that for any kind of ramp input, the proportional control action is bound to have a steady state error. And if we take the next input as the parabolic input, so where the Laplace transform is 1 by s cube. So here you can see 2s will cancel out from the numerator and there is still 1s left in the denominator, which will make the steady state error to go to infinity. So which means that if we are using a parabolic input and we are expecting a proportional controller action to do the job, we are making a blunder mistake. It's going to give you infinite steady state error. So this is the crux of steady state error from the point of view of the proportional control action. So then comes the features of proportional control action. As I mentioned, the proportional control action is directly proportional to the error. So that's why it's fast, because it's directly based on error. So if the error is more, the action is more. If the error is less, the proportional control action is less. So that's why it's fast in nature. It is based on instantaneous error. That's why it deals with the present. It lives in the present means it will take care of all the present. You can say if there is more error, it will take care of the errors in the present. And as I mentioned, for a ramp input, it is bound to have a steady state error. And it does not counter static loading. Static loading means if there is some gravity, we'll discuss in the next couple of slides later what do you mean by static loading. For the timing, we can say that it is not able to withstand the gravity load of the manipulator. So we'll discuss this in the what do you mean by static loading in the next control action. So next comes the derivative control action. So in the derivative control action, basically the actuating error is proportional to the rate of change of error. It's d by dt of the error. So what does this mean? So we have to break this inequality constant to equality constant. That's why we'll introduce a new constant as kd, which is equal to the derivative gain. So this derivative gain kd. So if we convert this as a Laplace transform, so we note that d by dt will be represented by s. So if we take the transfer function as output by input, we have the Laplace using Laplace transform, we have the gain as skd. So that's what being used over here as the derivative gain. Instead of kp, we can use skd. So again, if we try to calculate the steady state error, we will see that for the ramp input or even for the step input, the steady state error will be 0. And for the ramp input, the steady state error will be the 2 zeta by kp omega n. This we'll calculate in the next slide again. But for the timing, you assume that this is correct. So which means that still, okay. So what do you mean by, because the derivative control action is never used alone, we will use it with the kp plus skd. This is called as the PD control. So using the same control logic, if we calculate the steady state error, which we'll do it in the next slide, couple of slides later, so the steady state error will come out to be this. So what is the meaning? That there is this kd term is not there in the steady state error. So what does that mean? That the derivative control action has no bearing on the steady state error. So if we keep on increasing the gain, keep on reducing the derivative gain, it's not going to affect the steady state error. So the derivative control action, the features, so it's being really used alone. It's being rarely used alone because we know that at the steady state, after we'll reach the steady state, every system, whether there is error or not, it will be stabilized. So as at this in this band, so even though there is error, but still the rate of change of error is 0. So there is no output from the controller. So after achieving the steady state, there will be a 0 output from the derivative control action. That's why it's rarely being used alone. It increases the effective damping of the system. So why it is being increased? Because we know that there is a term called percent overshoot, which is equal to minus zeta pi upon 1 minus zeta square. So if it increases the damping of the system, the overshoot will decrease, which means that it reduces the oscillatory response of the system. Next, it is the major term is it is anticipatory in nature, because it expects that something large error at present. So which means because it's rate of change of error based on E by dt. So which something like you can say E t plus delta t minus e raised by t divided by delta t. So this is the, you can say, the next instant of error. So that's why it anticipates that something large is about to happen or something unexpected is about to come in the near future. So let's me take a corrective action right now. So it's like you can say our LIC policy. So for why we use this LIC policy? Because we know that We keep on paying this LIC premium again and again every year because we expect that something bad is about to happen, might happen with our car or with our any life. So let's take a corrective action, right? And it is also have the tendency to yield high control signals because at high frequency the rate of change will be very high. So it has the tendency to yield very high control actions. And as I mentioned, it does not affect the steady state error. So from the point of steady state error, if you want to have any control using the derivative control action, so nothing will happen. So again, it does not counter static loading. So static loading also we'll discuss in the next control action. What do we mean by static loading? So next comes the integral control action. So where you can see the actuating signal is proportional to the integral of the error signal. So what does this mean? That whatever is the amount of error present in the system till now, the total summation of the error, it will take care of that, the integral control action, because it's the integral from time 0 when the system started till this time to now. So the actuating signal is proportional to the summation of the whole error present in the system till now. So it's based on accumulation of the error. So to again we'll introduce this constant and we'll find that this is the gain Ki by S. And if again we'll calculate the steady state error. So we'll see that the steady state error for the ramp input in this case, because there is one S at the denominator, this S is extra we have. So because of this extra S for the ramp input, we have the 0 steady state error. So which is finite in the case of derivative control action. So this is being reduced to 0 over here. So if we have to use the ramp input, ensure that we must have the integral control action in the controller. And what are the features of integral control action? So it's slow. Why it is being slow? As I mentioned, it is based on accumulation of the error. It takes care of what is the error present in the whole system till now. So because it has to take care of the whole error, so it's slow in nature. So it's a looking back type. As I mentioned, it lives in the past because it has to take care of the whole error, what is being accumulated. It takes care of the history of the system. And as I mentioned, it increases the type of the system because of 1s in the denominator. So it reduces the steady state error. And it also counters the static loading. So what do you mean by static loading? So let's see that we are having this, there is a robot, and this robot, let's say, is a 2-link manipulator, which has to follow this trajectory. And you can say this is the desired trajectory, and we have to, let's draw with a different pen. So let's say the robot follows the trajectory in actual practice. So here you can see the red one is, let's say you can write as R of t, which is the commanded signal, and the black one is, you can say, the C of t, which is the actual output at that given instant of time. And you can see the difference between the two will give you the error. This is the amount of error over here. So let's say for the timing, the robot follow this red line very smoothly. So what does that mean? That there is no error, the ET will be 0, and rate of change of error will also be 0. So which means if error is 0, there is no output from the proportional control, and there is no output from the derivative control because rate of change of error is also 0 because it's following the trajectory very smoothly. But here you can see that if the robot has to stand over here, even if it is following the trajectory perfectly, if there is no output coming from the controller, still if the robot needs some torque for both the motors in order to take this position. So this is called as the gravity loading. So even there is no error, there is no rate of change of error, even that in order to handle this gravity loading, the robot has to, the motors have to apply some static torque. So otherwise what will happen then? So when there is no output, the robot will try to fall down. Next instant there will be error. So it will try to achieve this. So you will have a jerky motion like this. So that's the meaning of static loading, because now with the integral control action, you are having a integral. So because of this integral, you are having a constant because of this integral. So this constant we can tune, which can take care of this static loading. So even if there is a zero error, there is a zero rate of change of error, still there is a non-zero constant, which constant we can tune in order to take care of this static loading. So next comes the combination PD control. So under this PD controller, we have the actuating signal is basically proportional to the error signal, rate of change of error signal. So I'll go a little fast now because we have left with around 30 minutes. So the error signal is proportional to this. So that's why in order to break these two inequalities, we'll introduce two constants Kp and Kd. And using the Laplace transform, we have this as the transfer function of the Laplace, which is written over here as the gain of the PD controller. So this is the PD controller. So now, so for the PD controller, this is the, if we solve this block diagram, we'll get as the, this is the basically transfer function of the system. And now we can calculate the steady state error based on this transfer function. So this is the denominator polynomial basically. This is called as the denominator polynomial, which will play a vital role in order to control the system from the stability point of view. So this denominator polynomial, if you see, there is a change in the system as compared to the original plant. This is the original plant. Okay, let me choose a different pen. So this is the transfer function of the original plant when this K was not there. It's unity, it's a straight line. So the original plant has this transfer function which has been modified to this value using PD control. So this has brought basically three changes into the transfer function of the system. So what is the first change? The first change is the amount of zeta. So we know that this is the term, if we have to calculate the zeta value. So whatever is the coefficient of s in the denominator polynomial, we have to divide it by 2 omega n. So that will give us zeta value. Similarly, whatever is the coefficient of s over here, if we divide it by 2 omega n, so we should get the zeta value of the new system. So this will found that this new zeta should be equal to the old zeta plus kd omega n by 2. So which means, as I mentioned earlier, this kd will basically increase the damping of the system, which will help in reducing the oscillations of the system. This is the first change, that the damping of the system has changed from zeta to zeta dash value. And this zeta dash value is much higher than the zeta value. And we have this tuning parameter Kd with which we can tune the system, or we can tune the damping of the system. The next change is here you can see the second change. Let's change with the blue color. So original system has this as the natural frequency of the system, whereas this term has been modified to Kp omega n square over here. So as you can see, so the new natural frequency of the system has been changed from omega n to under root Kp omega n. So if we have to play with the natural frequency of the system, we should tune Kp. And third, if we see, original system doesn't have anything over here, but the new system has 1 0 over here. So that 0 is s equal to minus Kp by Kd. That will change the response of the system because it will depend upon the constants. So it will basically, if you see, there are three changes that have been brought into the system with the help of PD controller. But the crux is that if we have to tune the natural frequency of the system, if we have to modify the natural frequency of the closed loop system, we should always play with Kp. And if we have to reduce the oscillations or if we have to increase the damping of the system, we should always play with the Kd, not the other way around. So let's say if you want to increase the natural frequency of the system, and if you keep on increasing the value of Kd, that won't help, and vice versa. And then comes the steady state error. So similarly, we can calculate the steady state error using the same concept, and we'll find that the steady state expression will be like this. And if we now calculate using the same concept, this steady state error for the step input is 0. For the ramp input, where 1 by s square, we will have the, even for the PD controller, the steady state expression is the same. So this is the same expression as the expression of the proportional controller. Here you can see in this expression, we have only Kp term. There is no Kd term over here. So that's the crux, that the steady state error has no bearing, or you can say the derivative control has no bearing on the steady state error. So if we have to decrease or play with the steady state error, either we should use an integral control action or we have to play with the Kp gain. By increasing or decreasing the Kd gain will not help the steady state error. And for the parabolic input, again it is infinity. So observations: to change the damping, we should tune Kd. To change the natural frequency, we should tune Kp. And to reduce the steady state error for a ramp input, we can increase Kp, but that cannot be increased infinitely. And finally, Kd does not contribute to the steady state error. And as I mentioned, it is not possible practically to reduce the steady state error for ramp input to be 0, because this Kp is being related to the tau, the motor torque of the system, and you cannot have infinite torque from any motor. And the added 0 will modify the expression in the time response. Okay, now let's try to see what will be a PD controller as compared to the normal controller. So this is the error signal. So if we use only derivative control, so you can see over here there is a change in the error. So up to this, the error remains constant, and from this point onwards, the error keeps on increasing. So when there is no error, you expect no output from the derivative control. So like this up to here. And once there is a change in the error keeps on increasing. So you will have a steady rise, a constant. So that is the derivative controller. So this is the contribution of the derivative controller. So as compared to this, if we have the PD control, so we have the output like this orange color, where this is the case of derivative control, and this is the, you can say, contribution from the proportional control. So as the error keeps on increasing, the output of the proportional control also keeps on increasing. So this is the, you can say, the clear demarcation of the derivative control and the PD control. Next comes the PI controller. So again, we can use this as Kp with Ki by S. So I'll skip the mathematics. Again, we have this as the transfer function. This is the GS and HS. And if we try to solve this block diagram and try to find out the overall transfer function, you will see the denominator polynomial in this case will be of, you can say, third degree because of 1 by S term over here. So that's why now instead of a second degree polynomial, we are having a third degree polynomial. So it's having 3 roots. So in order to find the stability, if 2 zeta omega n is less than ki, it is an unstable system. And if 2 zeta omega n is more than ki, it's a stable system. So that we have to take care while designing this. So next comes the steady state error. Similarly, we can follow the steps of steady state error. And we'll find that this is the expression for the PI controller. And again, we can see for the step input is 0. For the ramp input it is 0 because earlier for the PD control it is finite, which has been reduced to 0. And for the parabolic input, because there is a 3s and there is a 3s will cancel out with this 3s. So this is reduced to a finite value. So which is infinite earlier. So what is the crux? So if we have to use a parabolic input, we must have the integral control action into the picture. We must have the integral control action into the picture. So what are the observations? It increases the type of the system because of this S in the denominator. It reduces the steady state error. It counters the static loading as I have discussed because of the integral control action, because of that constant. And finally, we can see the PI controller. So this is, let's say this is the error signal where you can say there is a sudden abrupt change, which is constant. So integral control alone, basically as there is an error and it is based on the total amount of error present. So this will keep on increasing like this way. And this is, you can see the constant when there is no error. Even that time also there is a some amount of torque being provided by this. This is a constant term which can handle the static loading. And as compared to the PI control, so we have, this is the constant part, this is the proportional part because error is constant, and this is the integral part because error is cumulative. So here you can clearly see what's the difference between an integral control action and a PI control action, how the error will change. And this is the crux of all three, where you can clearly see that PI controller. So this error goes to 0 over here, and this infinite error will go to a finite value. So if we have to deal with the steady state error, we must include the integral control action. And finally, we have the PID controller. So where we have discussed, we have the proportional control, which will deal with the present state of the system. We have the integral control, which is based on the past accumulation of the error. So it deals with the past of the system, taking care of the historical data. And the third, derivative, because it is anticipatory in nature, it takes care of the future of the system, what the system is about to respond in the near future. So it's like a famous Raj Kapoor movie, Kal Aaj Aur Kal. So where the integral control is the Kal and the proportional controller is the Aaj and the derivative control is the Kal. So that's the crux of this PID control. So if you have any doubts on this, you can have, otherwise we can switch to the next PPT, which is the application of these controls in different real-time applications. So should we switch to the next PPT? Okay, for more details, I have given the reference of my YouTube channel where all these lectures which we have covered in slightly faster manner are given. So you can follow this lectures on my YouTube channel. So where all you can find in more detail. So then next comes the multifaceted applications of control systems. So we'll try to cover this in maybe next 15 to 20 minutes. So right now I'm having collaborations with some of the national and international agencies. So with the, you can say, State University of New York, I'm working with assistive devices. With IIT Delhi, we are having a project with the on flexible manipulators. With CSA Chandigarh, we are working in medical robotics. With IIT Ropod, we are working in modular robotics. And with the University of Gävle, Sweden, we are working in exoskeletons. And recently we have got a project from DRDO also to develop or analyze their assistive device, which can help the soldiers to increase their cadence so that they can walk for a longer distance by carrying a higher payload. So these are the current collaborations, and all these collaborations are in the field of redundant manipulators, flexible manipulators, unstable systems, medical robotics, surgical and assisted devices. So in all these research directions, only one thing is common, which you can say basically a link in all this. So that's the controls. So that's why it's the importance of control is there of physics as well as in life. So let's briefly discuss. It's not possible to cover all six, so I'll cover the first three: redundant, flexible, and unstable. So the redundant manipulators. So this is the, you can say, amount of work done by us in during our stay at IIT Kanpur, where we have developed this software called as Yantrika at IIT Kanpur, which will take care of all aspects of any serial manipulator with any number of degrees of freedom. Maybe it's at 10 degrees of freedom, 20 degrees of freedom, 50 degrees of freedom. So all the modules have been developed from robot synthesis to robot path planning, path display, kinematics module, dynamics module, and the utilities which will take care of different systems. So if we talk about, let's say, robot path display, we have to feed some of the robot parameters along with the parameters of the environment with the help of these files. And we can get, we can say this is sort of nuclear plant where we have developed a snake-like manipulator, and the manipulator can clearly avoid the obstacles with the help of a suitable algorithm, and it can maneuver across this like a snake. So under redundant, you can see we are having this different application. It's like, you can say, a 3-link manipulator, which is shown in blue color like this. This is a 3-link manipulator, and it is supposed to move from this position to this position straight down in the presence of these 3 obstacles. So here you can see, because it's a 3-link manipulator, it's from the planar point of view, it's having infinite solutions. That's why because in the plane, if we don't take the orientation into account, it's having only 2 joints are sufficient to achieve any point within the workspace. So here we are using a 3-degree of freedom manipulator, and we can see that it can provide us multiple solutions. So here you can see from the algorithm, all the green obstacles the algorithms know a priori, where the red obstacle the algorithm doesn't know. So you can see this will follow and hit the red obstacle, whereas it will keep on avoiding the green obstacle. Will basically swap the now the bigger central obstacle is a green obstacle, so still it will avoid this and it will now hit this red one, smaller one. So similar is the case over here in the third case. So next we can see over here in, it is like a 7-degree of freedom manipulator, where you can see it's a 2 obstacles. It's basically showing you can say a pipe cross section falling through a narrow channel, which means that this robot can, like, in applications like, you can say,
Excuse me, sir.
yes.
Your slides are not visible. That references, the last slide is showing
I'm
references.
so sorry. I'm so sorry. So it should have been told to me earlier. I have skipped. Oh,
Participants, you are requested to please tell sir about that, whether the slide is
okay.
visible to you or not.
So just hold on.
It is muted at that time, so that's why you're not able to inform.
So should I stop sharing and reshare, sir? What should I do? So okay, let me try. So let me reshare.
Stop sharing and again reshare.
Okay. Okay. So is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
Yes, sir, it is visible.
I'm so sorry about that. So do we have some time, because it will take around 15 minutes to.
Yes, sir, it's up to you, sir. Time is not an issue
I
because this is the
because
last
I
session.
hope there is no talk beyond 4:30 also.
No, sir. There is no talk beyond 4:30.
Okay, so because I think this is the crux. After learning the basics, I think all the participants should understand how we can apply this control in different applications. So this will be having very less theory and more of videos.
Right, sir. Right, sir.
So as I mentioned over here, we have different. These are the different, you can say, collaborations, active collaboration which we are having with the USA, Sweden, with national collaboration with IIT Delhi, IIT Ropar, and with the CSIR lab at Chandigarh, as well as DRDO lab in Bangalore, in different facets. And all these research directions are in redundant, flexible, medical and assistive devices. And what is common in all this is the control term. So control is common in all these aspects. So as I mentioned, it's a redundant manipulator. This is one of the work we have done during our stay at IIT Kanpur, where we had developed these 6 modules of serial manipulators, which can take care of every aspect of robot, from kinematics to dynamics to path planning, path display. So over here, something like this, it's like a robot designed for a nuclear plant. So IGCAR Kalpakam, where the robot parameters and environmental parameters we need to feed, and the algorithm will help us in giving a path which is obstacle free. So next we are having this redundant manipulator, where the blue is the robot, the pink one is the red line which the robot should follow. As I mentioned, this is a robot of 3 degrees of freedom, which is supposed to move in a 2D plane. So it is having infinite solutions if we neglect the orientation. So here you can see the green ones the robot knows, the red one robot doesn't know. So that's why it will follow this path and it will hit the red obstacle. And in the next simulation, basically we will swap the obstacle. Now the central bigger one is green, which means the same robot, it will take a alternate path. So next, everything will remain same, robot is same, parameter same, task is same, but now it will take another different path. So that's how the power of redundancy resolution. So next simulation, we can see this is 7 degree of freedom manipulator, and we are having 2 obstacles which show basically the front section, cross section of the pipe. So it can be, you can think from the point of view of, let's say, a robot which is supposed to detect a sewerage blockage in a sewerage pipe, or it's something like a laparoscopic operation where the robot is supposed to find some blockage in some of the arteries. So from, if we say both the obstacles are red, which means the robot doesn't know that there is a wall thickness over here. So it will assume it's a free space and it will just roam around. So you can assume that if the robot inside us will roam around something, this what will happen. But now we'll swap the obstacles. Now the robot knows that there is a wall thickness of the artery. So it will follow a very trained manner, like a systematic manner, like a snake. Now, if you see carefully over here again, you can see the first 2 links will follow this almost, they are locked like 90 degree. So we have introduced this new obstacle over here. So now you can see it will lower its front arm over here. So to accomplish the task. So because again, it's having a redundant manipulator, which is having infinite solutions. So we can have multiple solutions to do the same task. Next is the flexible manipulators, where the applications you can see is from we can go inside the human body. It's to have a very soft gripper. It's like a for biopsy operations, or you can say it can mimic a elephant trunk, or you can have so many naturally biologically inspired robots like a fish, or it can be a reptile, it can be a lizard, it can be a snake. So if we have to mimic this, so everything is in the domain of flexible manipulators. So flexible manipulator is something over here you can see where it's a very light manipulator, but the major issue over there is that it has lots and lots of vibrations. The major challenge over there is how to take care of these vibrations. So basically we have to deal with the plant, which is a flexible model. So this flexible model doesn't have, you can say, all the sensors because it's doesn't have a sensor at all the places. So we have to deal with observer, reduced order observer, and we have to develop a compensator with the help of inverse dynamics as well as input shaper. So what is this input shaper? We'll discuss. So from the control point of view, this modeling of the manipulator is very important. So modeling will be typically done with the help of distributed and discrete systems, and discrete systems further have three categories as lumped parameter modeling, assumed mode methods, and finite element method. So this I'll just skip. So the then control of flexible manipulator, the major classification of controls is feed-forward control, feedback control, and hybrid control. So under feedback, we are having linear feedback as well as non-linear feedback. So under feed-forward, we have bang control, where you give two major impulses, and then we have shaping. So with multiple and robust shaping. So what is the shaping means? Command shaping means here what we can see. This is what we'll give as a step input. We get its modify this shaping with the help of developing this shaper. So we basically modify this input, and the resultant input is like this way. And you can see the response of this system is a vibration-free response. So in this getting the shaping, basically we have two parameters. One is called as the amplitude of this impulse and what instant you want to give this impulse. So this is the impulse response of a underdamped system, giving the first impulse. Then you have the second impulse. So at what time we have to give and what should be the amplitude, this is important. So here you can see the second impulse will basically have the mirror image of the first impulse. So the net, if we give both the impulses simultaneously, net is the green result, which will give you the vibration-free response. So then we have the feedback controllers. As we discussed, we have PD control, pole placement control, optimal control. So PD control we have discussed, PID control we have discussed in detail. So then there are more advanced controllers like pole placement controller. So PD control has limited design parameters which can be taken care by a suitable placement of the poles using pole placement technique. And then under optimal control, we will get the control strategy which will basically help in getting the optimal parameters. So then we have under non-linear controllers, we have torque control, which we requires exact knowledge of the system parameters. We have feedback linearization, which basically linearizes the nonlinear system with the suitable change of state space variables. Then we have robust control, where when the system parameters are not sure, we have parametric uncertainties. We have to deal with robust control. And when the parameters are changing in real time, we can also have a controller which will change its gains in real time also. That's called as adaptive control. Then we have sliding mode control, more advanced controllers, neural network based controls. So this is the case study of two-link manipulator where all the modes are being shown. And you can see over here, this is the response of the system where this is the, you can say, error of huge error, where red one is the desired trajectory and the black one is the actual trajectory. With the help of shaping, we can see this error has been reduced significantly. So they say 20 centimeter error because a very huge long manipulator, and this error has been reduced to 5 centimeters. So you can say there is a 75% reduction in the error over there. So next comes the underactuated systems. So again, same diagram. So underactuated systems, we have the underactuated means where we have lesser number of controlling motors. So if let's say 2 degree of freedom system, and so instead of giving 2 motors, we can control with the help of 1 motor only. So that's kind of systems are called underactuated systems, and which are very tricky to control. They are highly nonlinear and highly unstable, and it's very, you can say, a tricky problem to control them. So the underactuated systems, this underactuated systems comes under the category of 2 problems. Stabilization problem, where we want to stabilize the pendulum at the bottommost to topmost position, and the swing up control, where the pendulum we want to rise from the lower equilibrium point to the upper equilibrium point. So we have the mathematical model which we can develop using the mathematical modeling. This again, if it's something is unclear, you can follow the YouTube channel where you should get how to develop the mathematical model of such kind of robots. So I have the complete lecture series over there. If anyone is interested, can subscribe to the channel, and you can get to know how to follow, how to develop the model using Euler-Lagrange approach. So this is for analytical results. For real time, we have there is no model required. We have the real system. So what we are interested, we are interested in the cart velocity and its cart position and its velocity. So we have the incremental encoder, which will take care of the feedback of the pendulum. So these are the parameters of the system. So this is how we can mathematically model using the Euler-Lagrange formulation. This is the kinematics part, dynamics part, calculating the kinetic energy, potential energy, Lagrangian, and to finally get the equation of motion. And then we have to convert this equation of motion. We have to also introduce the motor dynamics and also the belt dynamics using these equations. So I'm skipping this part. Then this is the final equation of motion, which we need to convert into state space form in order to apply the control. So this is the final M, N, and G matrices, which needs to be converted to the state space representation. And this is the final state space representation. And we have to ensure, okay. So let's see both the controllers working simultaneously. So over left side, you can see we have the analytical results using the same set of parameters. On the right hand side, we have the experimental results of the same setup. So here we are swinging up with the help of a pole placement controller. So there is only one motor, and with the help of the dynamics of the cart, the pendulum has been risen to the unstable equilibrium point. Here you can see the setup. There is only one motor being attached over here, and this cart moves horizontally with the help of this belt drive. So here you can see there is a lot of jerky motion. This jerky motion is there because of this unmodeled dynamics, which the pole placement controller is not able to manage. So next comes the LQR controller, which is an optimal control. Here you can see the result is far better than the pole placement control. So this is the simulation result, and we have this as the experimental. Here you can see there is no jerkiness. It's a much more smoother response, and you can see this is a comparison of the swing angle of the pendulum in terms of both the controllers, where the black one shows the result of the pole placement control, and the blue one shows the results of the LQR control. So here you can see with the experimentation, there is a 56% reduction in the oscillation level. So LQR controller being on the optimal one, it performs much better as compared to the PPC control. So next comes the robustness of the system. Robustness means that if we want to play around, so here you can see we will try to disturb the system, still it will be able to work. So it's a highly unstable system. The controller is robust. The pendulum is going down. Here you can see pendulum is able to manage. And here we can see we are pasting one string part on the top of the. So then this is the same concept we have applied for the rotary pendulum. So here again you are having 2 degrees of freedom system. One is the rotary motion of the link and there is a vertical motion of the pendulum. This is called rotary inverted pendulum. And again you can see this is the disturbance robustness. We are providing the disturbance. And here on the left hand side we have placed a coin. So again you can see the weight of this pendulum is around 40 grams. So the weight of the coin is typically 10 grams. So you can say there is around 20% mass variation we have provided. And because of the change in the mass, natural frequency of the system also changes. So here you can see how the parametric variations, the natural frequency of the system will change because the mass of the system changes significantly. So even with the 20% change, there is the controller is performing well. On the right hand side, we are having the visiting card. And then we have tried different kinds of controllers like sliding mode controllers, integral sliding mode controllers. And we have also tried to vary with the help of mass. So there you can say there is a double tape being rolled around the pendulum. So mass of the pendulum has been changed up to 30% over here with the help of this tape. And even here you can check that the system is working perfectly with the help of more advanced controllers. So that's called more robust controllers. So this is different kinds of applications I have shown you from the context of the control in the robotic or assistive devices, in the flexible manipulators, redundant manipulators. Thank you. So any questions?
Sir?
Yes.
Participants, if you have any question, please you can ask.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, myself, Dr. Anil Kumar Gilawat. I am asking about that equations. We have derived some equations in kinematics and dynamics.
Yes.
How can we directly use that controller maybe PD controller or something like that, so that we can find out these type of results?
So that's either you have to use, like if you have to use this real-time system, you have to use any good language. So like typically you can control these real-time systems with the help of either MATLAB or LabVIEW or Python. So I have shown you the results using MATLAB. So the MATLAB has an interface with which you can control the real-time system.
Okay, can we find those videos in your YouTube channel, no, sir?
Yes.
Application of those equations in MATLAB.
Because see, it's not possible to cover the dynamics.
Yes,
Dynamics
sir,
itself
that's why I was asking.
2 to 3 lectures. So all those 4 lectures are there in my YouTube channel. So we have covered a lot of examples over there. So you can go through and subscribe the channel.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Any other question?
No more questions, sir. Participants, if you have any question, please you can ask. Thank you, sir. Thanks for such an enlightening and informative session. And thanks for giving us your valuable time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Tiwari. Thanks to all the participants for